I grew up in Norfolk, very different to Snowdonia, a lot flatter. But still, I think growing up in a landscape really inspires you, and I think is affected, even from the projects I've wanted to be involved in TV drama, has been informed by my love of stories coming from a landscape. And that's one of the reasons I love folk traditions and folk beliefs, because I think it's informed by our connection to a landscape. And that's always inspired me. So in making my own story and in being able to be given this incredible opportunity to write and direct my own story, I think it was always going to start with a landscape. And as I said, Who's Afraid the Water Sprite, very much a fairy tale. But as I got to learn about North Wales and as I was inspired by the clearings for the quarries, the film just took on this new shape. And I just think when you're given an opportunity to make your first film, you really just have to be brave and bold and be idiosyncratic and try not to fit into a box and just make the film that you want to see. And that was something that everyone was very supportive with, who, you know, in terms of the expectations for the film, what the end result would be, we were given a lot of freedom. So I just really enjoyed that process and just really embraced having control.
I mean, and it does sit very much kind of outside of any particular box. It's sort of a period drama, it's a mother-daughter drama, it's a folk story, it's a fairy tale, it's a horror film as well. You mentioned a little bit, could you expand a little bit on kind of your approach to sitting outside of genres?
Probably a nightmare for our distributors, sorry Bulldog. How do you define this film? But I think that's a part of the joy for me, is just making something that is defined by the viewing experience. And we didn't have a kind of commercial parameters of you must sell this film like this. We were just allowed to make the film we wanted to make, which might make it a challenging watch, it might make it hard to put in a box, but it feels, from my experience so far, that people have responded to the fact that it is different. You know, I think you get these opportunities as a filmmaker, as a creator, very rarely. When I work in TV drama, I have to do what I'm told. In this, it's more of a collaborative process, and that's an incredible experience for me.
And jumping over to Eleanor, you pretty much carry a lot of this film on your shoulders, and I wanted to ask you a little bit about kind of what did you think of the character of Gwen when you first read the script, and kind of did that change after you had done the film?
I mean, the moment I read the script, I knew it was an important role for me to do, and I just felt lucky that the script had even come my way, let alone that I was going in for a meeting. And you know, I was 16 at the time, and you don't really see many roles for women of that age where they are allowed to be strong and vulnerable and, you know, uncertain of their surroundings, but equally, you know, fighting against that and trying to make a life for themselves. That's, you know, something that you don't really come across. So I kind of fell in love with her from the moment I read the script, and, you know, that grew the minute we started filming, and I've continued to love her character, like, the more I've seen the film or even been doing Q&As and really, you know, delving into who she is.
And can you talk a little bit about, because you worked really closely with Maxine Peake, who plays your mother in the film, and you hold your own so strongly with her. Can you talk a little bit about kind of the process of working with her, and kind of whether that was a collaborative process, how you learn from her maybe?
I mean, she's such an incredible person to work with. You know, I was just in awe of her from day one. She's always been somebody that I've really looked up to, and so to be able to act with her and, you know, to create this bond on screen of mother and daughter, and, you know, all the complex layers between that, you know, the trust that's slowly crumbling and the deep love that's there, you know, that's obviously quite hard to build up, but I mean, what a person to do it with.
And moving on to you, Kobna, I wanted to ask you, because one of the things that struck me about your character was that he's the only one who kind of shows kindness to Gwen and her family, whereas the rest of the town is pretty much set against them quite violently and increasingly violently from the start. How do you see him fitting into Gwen's story? Kind of why do you think kind of that kindness shines through him?
I think the story, as well as being all the things you described, it examines the way societies as a whole can buy into an idea. What is it? I can't remember the name. It's some kind of plural deception, but they buy into it, and there's always an outlier who doesn't buy into it. But I think Dr. Wren is interesting because he's still a part of the system and therefore a part of the problem. But it's that dichotomy I think we all have, the contemporary parallels that we all have this dichotomy where we're part of a system that we have to subscribe to, that we may not always want to, but we just must. Yeah, and I think that's echoed in his life on the screen.
And Hilary and Tom, I wanted to, well, first with you, Hilary, I wanted to check because you discovered, if I may, William through your first short film. Can you talk a little bit about kind of that first impression, kind of what made you want to work with William again and kind of develop this film?
Yeah, it was the very first year of a festival that's now become Water Sprite and has been named after this film that Will made. At that time, it was made by students in Cambridge. And they called it Camera, which was sort of pun on Cambridge and camera. And the film won Film of the Year. And it really touched my heart. It was a beautiful film that had so many layers in it. And the cinematography and the direction was extraordinary. And Will went up on stage to collect his award and confessed right up there that he didn't really know what he was doing. He didn't know what
changed.
he didn't know what a first AD was. And they said, well, how did you do this then? And he actually looked quite baffled, and he just said, well, I told the story. And I just thought, I really like you and I want to get to know you, I want to work with you. And it started from there. And Tom became involved pretty soon after.
And can you talk a little bit from kind of your point of view, kind of about the development process of Gwen, and kind of because it's taken quite a long time, I believe.
Tom, you?
Yeah, I mean, I think Will would mind me saying that you sort of went on a journey with learning how to screenwrite, because I think probably your biggest instinct was to direct, but actually, you know, you're an incredible storyteller, and then went on a process with the script where I think you made something absolutely incredible with it. But we spent a lot of time in Wales, and and the landscape then informed what you were doing, and it sort of evolved from a fairy tale into the genesis of a fairy tale, which was very interesting, and something grounded in something quite real as well. And I mean, that was fantastic to witness, really. And Will was just a sort of natural storyteller and writer and director, so it was I just had to sort of stand there and say, yeah, that sounds good.
It is really good having someone to bounce off creatively, and it happens with your entire crew, but specifically when you're writing, it's really helpful to have that person going, just an outside voice. And sometimes it can be encouraging, and sometimes they're pointing out the really obvious mistake you've made. But it is vital. And there was a lot of, even my experience going away and working in TV drama, it informed my writing as you just get more experience. So it took 8 years, but I think part of that is because it's a slow process, but also, as Tom says, I had to learn. I will also say, Who's Afraid the Water Sprite, which is the film that this grew from, wasn't my first film, and I think for any filmmakers out here, it was actually probably like my 10th, 11th, 12th, I'm not really sure. I just made lots, and each one got gradually better. So it wasn't like I made a short film that then got me a feature film. Yeah. It's definitely a journey, and you're taking baby steps.
And kind of a question for all of you, because I imagine you'll have different experiences with this, but obviously the landscape is gorgeous, but I also can imagine it's probably not very kind to shoot in.
No.
Can you talk a little bit the actual kind of production process and some of the challenges that you may have encountered?
I've got an amazing image in my head of Tom, glamorous producer of movies, with sort of rubber paving slabs from a children's playground, which we didn't steal. They were getting rid of it, so we took it. Paving the way to set in this sort of really impractical, cool East London jumper, covered in mud, and just like some kind of beast covered in mud laying the way to set, just so that our cast could get to set, because clogs aren't very good, it turns out, for like 3 feet of mud. Yeah. But we, November in Snowdonia, all of these funny stories are our own fault, really.
Yeah.
I don't know how you guys felt about working in it.
Yeah, we learnt the hard way that clogs and very old boots were not able to get through like 3 feet of mud. And that was just on the way to set. That wasn't even like during a scene. So yeah, we learned the hard way, but it kind of made it even more fun. It added to the challenge.
I mean, I had the same experience with the mud, but what I don't think any of these could possibly know was I hired a car one day, I had a day off, and actually got a bit lost on Snowdonia. I did. I just thought, yeah, it's only a bit of a walk, isn't it? I'll go up on my Todd, yeah. I went up on my Todd, no whistle, no map, no nothing. And this fog started creeping in. Couldn't find my way back. I was up there for hours.
This is a great way to find out about this.
I'm really glad we didn't know that.
We've got an insurance claim. We lost one of the actors.
Yeah, he went close. But I got to meet the landscape up close and personal. For me, it was rather beautiful because it was so these, like you see in the film, these sweeping vistas of just nature, and then the occasional wall. You know, it's very humbling, gorgeous, but freezing and noisy. You're just standing still. It's noisy because it's windy.
And we were at the mercy of the climate. We had to halt production 3 times for wind that was so strong, so mile an hour. We couldn't put lighting stands up, and we had a location flood, and we had snow. But you kind of just have to embrace that. And also, it becomes a part of the film. It informs the scenes. You evolve the scenes as you're shooting them because it starts snowing. So you actually almost rewrite to it. And also, I think the wonderful sound design is using the wind as a texture. And actually, the opening wind, as you're watching the opening credits, is actually Eleanor's nursery rhyme, the bedtime nursery manipulated into the wind. So we really used. I just remember, like, even laying in bed at night, you would hear like the sound of foxes outside or the sound of wind and thunder. Just really, as a kid, playing on your imagination. So we wanted to get that into the film.
I wanted to pick up on that because that works a lot into building up the atmosphere of Gwen. And the other thing that really struck me, especially in the big screen, was the cinematography, which is kind of really quite dark, moody, and oppressive at times, and it works really well at kind of isolating the characters, especially as you build towards the ending. So could you talk a little bit about your collaboration with your director of photography?
Yeah, so Adam, I've worked with him since the short films, and it's been 10 years working together, and I think there is a real shorthand there that helps when you get to make your first feature film. You're making it with your friends, basically, and I think that's really important. But I feel like every frame of a film is essential, and it has to be working towards telling a story. I do occasionally shoot handheld, but I just feel like each frame needs to be considered. And for this, in order to build the atmosphere and to work with your cast in a way where each shot is progressing the story and adding to the tension and adding to the atmosphere, is you can't leave that to chance. So also the aesthetic of the natural lighting, just this could have been a much more fantastical, colourful film. But actually, if you're saying dread and terror comes from reality, I think it's important that the film feels earthy. So yeah, a lot of mood boards, a lot of references, a lot of artists we looked at just to get the look right. I think that's really interesting and good interpretation of it, because what I wanted to do was say, I think there's something very spiritual about it, and how do beliefs begin? Like, how do folk traditions of breaking this skull open to release bad luck, where does that come from? And that comes from interpreting what's happened to you. So now we wanted to play between the reality and the fantasy, and to keep the audience questioning: is she going to be a monster, or is it going to be, is it going to become a ghost story, or like, but then at the end turn it around and say, no, the horror's in the reality of, it's like an anti-capitalist folk horror at the end, rather than, a fantastical narrative. So, I think that's a really fair interpretation.
I'm very lucky because I have a very supportive family, and it's very matriarchal, and I've always had the ultimate support from my mum and from my grandma. And so to be able to look to them and say, this is obviously about bonding and strength, obviously that was incredible to be able to go to them and have them as a support system after a very long day of freezing. But yeah, I wouldn't say that there were many comparisons I could draw from my relationship with Maxine in the film to me with people in my own family. It's very different. But the deep love, that's something that I could bring to it. And I was so happy that it was this tight-knit matriarchal family that were keeping together in the face of adversity, and that is something that I believe in. You know, that's something that I can get behind, and I think that young women should support as well.
Yeah, and I'm very aware as a male director that when I'm working with someone such as Eleanor, it's a very open process, and I take on, you know, if Eleanor has an idea about a scene, I'm more than happy to evolve it, because, you know, I'm a male writing a female role, so I need to listen to her. But also, I've got my mum and dad here actually, so I will also, you know, I think I wouldn't be a filmmaker if I wasn't given the support and belief by my parents to make films. And I think the important thing I wanted to get across was that actually when you grow up, you might feel like, oh, why am I being punished? Why is this happening? But actually, it's kind of, what the overriding message of the film, you know, put capitalism and the landscape to one side, is that relationship of really they're there to support you. And specifically about women, I think, and weirdly, this is a conversation I was having with my wife in bed yesterday, how the women in this film, witchcraft was almost used to persecute women of power, women who were separate to the rest of the community, even midwives. It was used by men who were afraid against them. And I remember going to Conway Hall to a talk on witchcraft documentaries in the 1970s, very niche.
Oh my God, I was there as well.
You was there as well. High five. So you might have asked the question that I'm about to talk about. So this is a brilliant talk. It's seminal. It was supposed to be in a pub, and this guy was really baffled, and he walked out, and the audience was massive, and he was asked, like, why is this move from a small venue to here? And he was like, because it's topical, because it's important. This was like 3 years before I made Gwen, so maybe, you know. But that's really bizarre. We're both there. It's really.
He was also holding a beer when he came out.
Yeah, he was. He had good style. But if the witch is about witches are real and they're to be feared, Gwen is about everyone has a different belief and that no one's a witch and they shouldn't be feared.
But it is sort of I noticed a lot of the kind of witchy undertones that are never quite made explicit or made supernatural at all, but they're always sort of tinted there, and you can see almost how they could be interpreted by the other people in the town as kind of, you know, an element of witchcraft or something supernatural that surrounds Gwen and her family and her mother in particular, and how that can be misinterpreted. So it's interesting that you laid that in there.
Yeah, there's a brilliant bit of research into the folklore that we didn't put in, just beliefs, which I wish we had, which was if you've got rheumatism, you just tie a potato to your hand and go to bed. When you wake up, it's better. I don't know how to get that in a film, but I would love to. But the logic is it improves the circulation, so it works. A lot of these sort of home remedy, home belief, witchcraft things, actually they work, you know, whether it's herbal or whether it's just, you know, happens to work. I think that's fascinating.
I wanted to kind of just wrap up by asking all of you really what you would like people to take away from Gwen.
I'm waiting for someone else to answer this question.
Two things. Most importantly for me, perhaps the value of family and of absolutely unconditional love, but also just the beauty of North Wales. If you haven't been, go.
I think what drew me to the script and to the project after meeting with Will was the mixture of fable and reality, and how the vocabulary of horror and fable and so on actually fed into the reality of the difficulty of life in those times, the complexity of emotion and depression and so on in those times that we don't quite see. So I think I'd like them to take away, I know, that was very honest portrayals that we've given. Yeah.
I think for me that if there's anybody out there who can take away the fact that, you know, this is a young woman who's going through a really tough time, and I think that if you can take away the fact that you should always be nice to your parents, they are doing their best no matter what. So if there's any young people out there who are kind of relating to anything in this film, then, you know, they're doing their best. And it is about unconditional love and the meaning of family. And, you know, when you strip away any of the other elements, it is this deep, unconditional love. And if you can find that, and it might take you a while, you might get a bit older and then realise just how lucky you are. But if you can find that, and this is a catalyst, then, you know, I feel like I've done my job.
You definitely did your job. You really. Yeah, I just think questioning on, it's kind of hard to follow up these guys because they've totally nailed it. But just question the narratives you're told, really. Yeah. I think that's a big thing for me. Yeah.
That's a great point to end on. Thank you, all of you, so much. Congratulations on the film. Thank you for sharing it with us.